Hi, my name is Paula Robinson. Welcome to On Beacon Hill. I'm sitting here today with State Representative Mary Louise Kehoe, and we're going to be talking about some of the things that she is fighting for the town of Dedham and surrounding communities. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Paula. It's a pleasure to be here.
You've been doing, not only are you an interesting character, which I want to go into, very unusual, you hold two hats in the town of Dedham and surrounding communities, but you also represent communities outside of Dedham, and I want you to talk a little bit about both, the two hats that you wear and the areas that you represent.
I'd be glad to, Paula. I represent the 11th Norfolk District, which includes all of Dedham, half of Westwood, and 1/5 of Needham. It's a very interesting district because Needham and Westwood are similar as far as demographics are concerned, and Dedham is somewhat extreme. We have here in Dedham, most unfortunately, pockets of poverty, pockets of homelessness, and those are all issues in which I'm very concerned. The district, of course, is widespread, but running through the district is a common thread, and that thread is comprised of local issues.
Right.
Local issues really don't differ very much from town to town. We all have infrastructure problems. Today, very serious infrastructure problems. And you know, those go from potholes to roots of a tree disturbing a sidewalk, public transportation, so on and so forth. And I feel that serving in both capacities has been an asset to my district.
Okay, well now, the one thing that we haven't talked about is the two capacities that you serve in.
I serve as state representative for the 11th Norfolk District, and I also serve on the Dedham Board of Selectmen.
Okay, all right. Now, let's first talk about your hat, your position as state representative. Okay, there is some, there is a swearing-in ceremony that just recently happened. Do you want to?
Yes, Paula. Yesterday, as a matter of fact, January 6, 1993, the 178th legislature convened. The members of the legislature, in particular, in my case, the House of Representatives, 160 of us, were sworn in by the governor. The ceremony is one that is really steeped in tradition. Very impressive, I might say, and a ceremony which includes the presence of families. You will see grandmothers, aunts, uncles, husbands, wives, grandchildren witness the ceremony. The chamber and the gallery are overflowing with people, and there's just an air of festivity and goodwill. Once the governor completes administering the oath of office, the speaker then sends a delegation of House members to the Senate to inform the Senate that we've organized.
Okay, now how often does the swearing-in ceremony happen?
Every 2 years.
Every 2 years, okay. And, well, congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. It's exciting to look forward to a new session, and of course the sessions are biennial, meaning 2 years.
Okay. Now, what are you looking forward to in the new year?
Well, I think one of the most exciting things that I'm looking forward to, and certainly serving the best interest of the future of this Commonwealth, is the education reform package. The Speaker has informed us that on January 25th, the House will begin debate on that reform package. It's a very long, detailed package. As a matter of fact, I spent New Year's weekend going through underlining the sections that I questioned, making comments. And certainly, I do have a lot of questions on the package that I have just read.
Now, where has this package? Is this the package that's come down from the president,
The governor?
Clinton?
No.
Now,
There have been several packages, Paula. This is the latest.
okay.
And I sense that this will also change between now and January 25th, because yesterday the Speaker charged the House Committee on Education to go back and look at it, refine it, and be ready for briefings on or about the 18th or 19th of January, and that would be briefings for the House membership.
Now, what are some of the exciting things that are contained in this package?
I think the most important issue that will be addressed in the package is providing equal opportunity for quality education for all of the students in the Commonwealth.
Regardless of their class status.
No exceptions.
Great.
And I believe that this is going to be accomplished, if we're looking at the fiscal aspect of the package, this will be accomplished through a foundation-based formula. In other words, the committee will make a determination of a minimum amount of money to be spent per pupil.
Okay. Now, has that arisen because many students are having a hard time paying for their education?
That has come about because primarily the cities have not been able to properly fund public school education.
Okay.
However, I believe that the major stumbling block with this reform package is going to be detailing the fiscal responsibility. How are we going to pay for all this? We are going to be looking for new programs. The towns can't pay for it, and certainly the state is going to have to pick up its share of responsibility. We are struggling in the small towns, and let's talk about my district, to provide as many dollars as we can through our annual budget for funding public school education. I'm not certain if the elastic band holding those dollars together can stretch any further.
Yeah.
And so I fear that the suburbs, the suburban communities who have been doing their job to support public school education may be penalized because the cities will be given more monies to make up the difference. And I think that's where perhaps the most difficult debate will be centered.
Yeah.
And until that is ironed out, we are going to have problems with the reform package. Now, it's my understanding that they are working very, very hard
Yeah. Well,
to
you certainly don't
detail
want
the formula.
Yeah. You definitely don't want a discrepancy and have the suburban people sending their children into the inner cities for education. You don't want that. And on the other hand, I understand in the cities what's going on is that the Boston Public Schools is misspending $9,000 a year per child.
That's correct.
And many of those students are dropping through the loops, and Sheriff Rufo was quoted as saying that he spends about $23,000 a year to keep a child incarcerated, or keep a young person incarcerated for a couple of years. And then they go out and they have no trade. There's no way of training them there, and because they have no other trade, and most of the young people that go in because of crimes of money. And because they have no trade, then they turn around and they have to go back. So it becomes a cycle. That's difficult.
Exactly. But when you look at the $9,000 per pupil that Boston is spending, and certainly the suburban towns cannot afford to spend that.
What are the suburban towns spending?
I would say an average of about between $5,000 and $5,400.
Really?
But why should we be penalized because we have chosen to be fiscally prudent in managing those dollars to educate our children?
And that, you're right.
And Boston has not. But we stand to be penalized, and I think, as I just said, that's where the greatest debate, the hottest debate will take place on this reform package, unless it is straightened out before the fact of the debate. I mean, there's so many other issues attached that we won't get into today, but perhaps in the future we could discuss them.
Yeah, especially after the issues are settled. What is that, the 21st?
We will begin debate on the 25th.
On the 25th. And I'm also quite interested in how this package is going to fit in with what is happening at the presidential level.
That's right.
With, and so there's a lot more to go with that.
That's right.
Let's talk about some of the legislation that you have sponsored in the past. You're an individual who is pretty well known by those who know you in the town as one that is very caring about people and issues of humanness.
Well, I just have always believed that helping people is the best thing that I can do. And whether it's helping them through legislation or helping them through a phone call or a meeting, if I can help one person every day, and I try very hard to practice that, I feel quite satisfied that I am doing the best I can. Most recently, and let's say it was back early in November, the House overrode the governor's veto by voting to restore $1.7 million to give additional help to the homeless people across the Commonwealth.
The governor and what was his reason for?
We overrode the veto. He cut that money from the budget because he said that we could not afford it. Well, I just feel that we must afford to give shelter to those who would otherwise be forced to sleep in the street, in doorways.
Yeah. Well, well, I'm not sure. 30% of the figures, I believe, of the people who are sleeping in the streets are veterans. And those are people who have given their lives for this country. And many of them, there's a term that's being used around being shell-shocked and such, but many of them are having problems re-entering normal society and have chosen to live in combat station by sleeping in the streets because they've never been allowed to re-enter. So if there's no help or there's no caring at that level, then how do you begin to say thank you or I appreciated you putting your life on the line for me so I could have my freedom? I agree with you. I think that you're right.
It's very, very sad. And what we were able to do through this restoration, in part, was to identify sufficient funds to be able to purchase 50,000 beds for those homeless people, including single-family mothers with young children. And we shouldn't forget those, and in some instances there are mothers and fathers, but primarily mothers with young families who have no place to go, who cannot even, because of ignorance, complete an application for priority housing. You find them living in an old vehicle.
Right, and a lot of the homelessness has happened. One, mothers get blamed for being single parents when the father it takes two people to make a child, and the father is absent, and if you don't have the two incomes in this economy, then you certainly can't afford a lot of, especially after the economy has doubled. And but then how do you begin to afford a place at $600 or $700 or $800 a month if you're not even able to fill out an application?
But let me also say that I have constituents right here in the town of Dedham who have lived with their young children in automobiles. So we certainly are not exempt from those problems in this town.
Right.
And I have tried.
What are the numbers of homeless people? Do you know that?
I can't give you the numbers because
Okay.
I don't think that we've been able to identify a number of homeless people.
Right.
In the suburban communities in Boston, they do have
And figures, okay.
figures.
There are other issues around children that you've worked with. You want to talk about
Yes, foster care placements. Because of the recent controversies and upset over foster care placements, I have worked very hard on the regulations to ensure that foster care placements are correct before the fact.
that? Right. It's almost unthinkable that they wouldn't check out the families and that kind of thing. It was beforehand.
You're absolutely right, Paula. And what we've tried to do, and it's come in the form of a regulation, and that is to run a criminal record check on the prospective foster care parents to make certain that there is no indication of violence on the record,
Right.
that the record is absolutely clean, because home environment means so much to a youngster who is going to be placed in a foster care home. Just imagine the trauma that that youngster has gone through trying to walk through the door of a new home.
Certainly.
And then after a few months, maybe find that the child is abused.
And certainly on levels, record checks are required on levels such teaching in the Boston Public Schools is one of the things that they require. And the child isn't with the parent during, with the teacher during the evenings and such.
Just moving from that, because yesterday was the beginning of our new session,
Okay.
I would like to move forward to mention a few pieces of legislation that I have been involved with as far as sponsorship. Just to touch on that, and then maybe as time goes on, we'll be able to follow the process of that. We've already, some months ago, done a program on the legislative process.
I thought it was very good.
Well, I think it's really letting the public grasp how the process works.
Is there the public participation that you would like to see from the communities that you represent in the legislative process?
Oh, absolutely. And let me assure you that my constituents, many of them, will call me and ask me where a particular bill is today.
Oh.
Many request copies of a bill, an analysis of a bill, and we respond as quickly as possible, and usually that information is in the mail by the end of the day.
And it's all public information?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But, to use me as a resource, I think, is really important.
Okay.
I've sponsored a bill that I think is quite interesting, and I am hopeful will lend itself eventually to improving our economy just a little bit. And God knows we need to help our economy. And this
How?
is designing a license plate bearing the recognition of the University of Massachusetts, which is a wonderful, wonderful institution of higher learning. And the proceeds from this plate would go to fund a chair at the University of Massachusetts.
Okay, now can you explain that a little bit more? One, why did you select the University of Massachusetts, which I agree is a fantastic school, and what position or what kind of power would this chair at the UMass hold? Or-
Well, I selected the University of Massachusetts because I think it is a great school. We have had people graduate from the University of Massachusetts that have had outstanding careers, and people who I feel would be in a position to underwrite that little extra cost to have a University of Massachusetts.
I mean, that's the way the
license
private
plate.
schools work.
That's right.
Harvard basically follows through with their own, so
Right.
you're taking a state school basically the same route.
That's right.
Okay.
The chair, which would be an outgrowth of the monies derived from this plate, would study what we do best in Massachusetts, so that we would be able to market what we do best. Why not share what we have with the rest of the country?
That's right.
And maybe the rest of the world. I think we could do a much better job of marketing Massachusetts. And that's why I decided that this was one approach which might be worthwhile using.
I think it's very interesting. It's very creative, challenging, and I think that the young people who it'll give them almost an automatic introduction to the real world and to allow them to use their skills of research and
That's
such
right. That's
to
right.
better the state.
Exactly. It's helping students, it's helping the Commonwealth, and in the end, it's going to help each and every one of us. So I'm
Right.
very excited about the prospect of this happening, and I intend to push this as hard as I can.
I think that's fantastic.
Another bill that I filed, and unfortunately, it's a refile because the clock ran out the other night before the Senate finished it. It had gone through the House and partway through the Senate, and that is regulating the sale of surplus state vehicles/equipment. What that would allow every city and town across the Commonwealth to do is to have the first option to buy state vehicles and/or equipment. Presently, they go out to auction. And of course, because of Proposition 2.5, the cities and the towns don't have the means, oftentimes, to compete with the private sector in bidding. And I believe that because of Proposition 2.5 and the fiscal constraints it's placed upon us, we should at least have the first option to buy back what our tax dollars have paid for. So as I say, I was disappointed the other night that this did not go through the final step, but we have refiled it, and I expect it will go through early in the session.
Well, it's a very logical move, because if you look at anybody that works in a store or anything like that, I remember I used to work at Saks Fifth Avenue, and one of the benefits was at the end of the year, anything that they didn't sell, we had first dibs on.
Wonderful.
So it just made a lot of sense. And we're coming close to the close of the show, but before we close, I would like you to touch a little bit on what is going on with your other hat.
With my other hat.
Yes.
Well, presently, I, through the unanimous agreement by my colleagues on the Board of Selectmen, we have placed an article in the warrant for the 1993 annual town meeting to purchase a good-sized tract of land here in Dedham, which would be used for many purposes, recreational purposes, I should say. It would allow the construction of a pathway between the high school and the pool, a safe passageway. It would allow for a senior center to be constructed. it would allow for Stone Park, which is our football park, to be enlarged. Maybe we would have a bicycle path there, maybe a physical fitness path. But we need town meeting to say yes and to appropriate the money. I have come up with a rather innovative means of financing. The MBTA, who is the seller in this case, is willing to, has agreed to 5-year term at no interest. So I just think it's an opportunity we cannot afford to pass up. Also,
I agree.
I was able to negotiate a lease some 6 years ago with the MBTA for a parcel of their land for use as a soccer field. We have a wonderful new soccer field there, and at present I am working with the T to purchase that so that the town of Dedham will then be able to have an additional piece of property. Not only will we have the existing soccer field, but we will go to a permanent soccer field.
I think that's
And
fantastic.
it's really, it works very well wearing both hats because I'm able to maneuver these things back and forth. And certainly, if I'm willing to give up the time to continue my position on the Board of Selectmen, I think not only does Dedham benefit, but the other towns benefit, because I began by saying we have a common thread that flows through local affairs. 4 members on the Board of Selectmen also have full-time positions. Certainly my position in the legislature is full-time, and if I can devote the extra time I have to serve on the Board of Selectmen, I just think it's a great opportunity.
Well, I think that that's fantastic. Well, you're certainly the humanist, and I will be looking forward to what happens in the in January with the education reform bill, and certainly with what's happening for the things that you're providing for the youth in the town of Dedham. Thank you very much for appearing on the show.
Thank you, Paul. It's been my pleasure.
Okay, you've been watching On Beacon Hill. My guest has been Mary Louise Kehoe, the state representative for the 11th North Fork District. My name is Paula Robinson. Thank you for watching. Hi, welcome to On Beacon Hill. My name is Paula Robinson, and today my guest is Senator Marion Walsh. Now, as you know, I'm sure that the reason that we're running these series of shows, and you can verify this with me, is because we find such a big difference between the way media interprets what's going on Beacon Hill and the way what is actually happening. You want to tell us a little bit first about yourself and then about some of the things that we're working?
Well, I'm so happy that you have the program.
Thank you.
It's, I think the key was in your first sentence, that how the media interprets what happens. I wish they had a standard of reporting what happens and then let all of us make the interpretations as citizens. Well, but myself, I am pleased to say that I'm recently elected to the state senate. I'm a Democrat from West Roxbury, and I've been in a little bit more than a month. And prior to that, I served for 2 terms as a state representative as a Democrat in the House of Representatives. I'm an attorney. I went to a local law school evenings, Suffolk University. I did graduate work. I have a degree in ethics and theology, a graduate degree from Harvard Divinity School. And I went to a great small women's college named Newton College of the Sacred Heart, where I studied philosophy and history. And I went to a wonderful high school here in the neighborhood, Ursuline Academy. And I have strong interests in public service. I find it rewarding and productive. And I'm pleased that I have the opportunity to work on behalf of the people of Dedham.
Oh, that's excellent. That's excellent. You're very, you're unusually qualified for enough said.
Right. Whatever it is we do.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between being a state representative and being a senator.
Well, I'm learning. As a practical matter, state representatives represent 40,000 people. And we have 160 state representatives.
Okay.
That's what I was when I represented West Roxbury and Roslindale. Now that I serve in the state senate, it's a much smaller body. We have 40 state senators, and each of us represent 160,000 people. Senatorial districts are much more diverse. The one that I'm elected to serve is 1/3 of the voting population of Boston, Dedham, Westwood, Walpole, and Medfield.
Okay.
In a smaller body, your voice has more influence and you have more responsibility.
I see. And now, do you work directly with the state representatives to accomplish your goals?
I do. The ability to which we work together and how closely we work together is really a function of our personalities. There is no manual on how to be a state rep or how to be a state senator. You rely an awful lot on common sense and professional courtesies. In the district that I represent presently, we have 10 elected state representatives. Now they took an oath, they have a charge independent of mine to the people they represent. I also represent 160,000 people, the same people they do.
Right.
On some issues we'll be like-minded and others we won't. We each have to make our decisions independently. What I do as a state rep and now as a state senator is try to be mindful of their concerns. As a state senator, if I can be helpful, if once their matter passes the House and it comes to the Senate, I would like to help them have it become law.
Right.
If it gets bogged down and there's no one advocating for that, I'd like to do that for them.
Okay.
Other issues are also important that are not necessarily legislative. There can be community concerns where a state senator can bring the authority and influence of their office to help a neighborhood problem.
Right.
However, you can cause a problem if you don't do it right. You have to have respect for the different levels of government. We have select people who are elected, planning boards, different other elected people who have also responsibilities. And it's not up to me to roll over them. It's up to me to say, how can I be helpful?
Right.
Because
I understand.
they have a separate duty as well.
Okay. And the difference of time representation between the state representative and the state senator is?
Well, having so many more people. I have 4 times as many people now.
Okay. Well, I mean the term.
The length of service is a 2-year
Length of
term.
service. Okay.
State rep, state senator both serve for 2 years.
They're both 2-year terms.
U.S. congressperson, 2 years. A U.S. senator, 6 years.
So by the time you figure it out, it's time for you to get rid of them. Okay. All right. Now, let's talk a little bit about the work that you're currently doing. All right. You just were inaugurated, or is that
Sworn
correct?
in. We had the inauguration ceremony, and it was January 6th.
And the following day, you were working on
We were working on the famous garden bill.
Right. And can you talk a little bit about that? What are the complications now? I'm understanding a little bit that the Boston Garden is on public land, but
The new
or it's
garden.
on private land, or it's public.
Right.
Talk about.
Well, the whole garden controversy is a nice example, probably a great civics lesson. And as a legislator, what I often read in the newspapers and what I experience as a state senator are again very different. We have some very fine national sports teams here in Boston,
Right.
and they've been playing at the very old Boston Garden, which is owned privately. The people that own the garden would like to build a new Boston Garden. They'd like to build it on what is now public property.
Okay, now it's currently on public property.
It's currently on private
It's
property.
currently on private property.
Right.
Okay.
But they don't want to build it on the present site. They want to build it on land behind it,
Oh, I see.
which is
public.
publicly owned.
And
There's also air rights. Public air rights are involved, and other
public air
and
rights?
easements. Yes, and the
That's
tension.
new now, isn't that?
No,
that's-
it's always been a problem because of the height of the building, and it's a legitimate land use problem. And the concern is recognizing that having national teams and having such faithful, caring fans is, one, a wonderful experience for us, and two, brings in a lot of revenue.
That was my thing. Now, even though the other piece is that even though the teams are privately owned and the garden is privately owned, the teams are kind of publicly owned in
That's right.
in a way.
We have relationships,
Right.
personal relationships with the
Not
teams.
just personal relationships, but public investment.
That's
You know,
right.
people, there's a certain amount of not revenue that's not just goes to the state to support the things that are going on in the state or in the city, but also the whole pride and moral and all of that.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're right. It's far-reaching. It touches everything, from the person who goes in to watch a game and buys that pizza or that hot dog or pays to park that car, to the T-shirt that's sold, to all the people who get together in their living room and watch that game.
Right. It's a fair. Okay.
And then all the taxes that are paid on the services that are provided that support the
Right.
entertainment.
So now, what is the controversy? Is it not being allowed to? Is it that it can't be built on the land that's behind, or?
The controversy is what is considered a fair and reasonable package for the taxpayer. The property owned by the public, the easements around the property in question, the air rights, and the MBTA parking garage, which has 1,200 spaces. Now, that's publicly owned parking garage. One of the elements in the whole package was that those individuals who bought deluxe seating from the Boston Garden owners, there's 900 of them, part of their package is they would have a prime parking space in this publicly owned garage.
Are those annual seats that are bought?
Yes. So the owner of the garden made representations to the luxury box seats that they would have a parking space in a public garage. And part of the commitment from everyone involved was knowing that I have a parking space in that garage.
Right.
Well, you can't promise what you don't own.
Right.
So that was one big problem
Right.
for the developer and for the legislature. How can you give title to something you don't own? As a practical matter, a lot of people come into work and park in Boston and park in that parking garage. If every time there's a garden event with 900 spaces promised, that leaves only 300 available, where does the public park?
Now, the people that own the land, do they not own the parking garage?
Right, it's an MBTA public parking garage.
Okay, so now, is part of the air rights piece that there's no garage that can be built in the garden itself, or under the garden, or over?
Well, there's also an MBTA stop part of this, which is under the garage.
Right, but it doesn't help the private person with the 900 seats.
No, it doesn't.
Right.
And there were also other complications that at one point the garden was going to get free advertising on the MBTA, which would annually have been $400,000.
Is that because of the free parking, or in exchange for the free parking?
No, that was one more thing the developer wanted to have, was free advertising. They wanted to advertise their garden events on the MBTA property without charge.
Well, that's not fair.
Well, that was
Well,
a
that's not
feeling.
for me to judge.
No, but it is. You're perfectly entitled to have an opinion on that.
Yeah.
One, that's the point, is that there's a public interest here. The
Yeah.
public owns that garage.
Yeah.
The public owns the tea station, and the public owns the land that the new garden hopes to be built on.
Right.
So it's when does the public get protected without breaking the agreement?
Right.
How do we maintain these great teams in Boston and all the good things it brings?
So
and also be
is the
fair to
developer's
public?
threat that he'll take the teams outside?
Well, that's been reported, that the teams will leave Boston unless we give the developer what the developer thinks they ought to get.
That's interesting.
Now, there are some people who feel that no matter what the developer wants, give it to them because we don't want to lose the teams.
Well, that's foolishness.
And there are other
Yeah.
people who feel, as you do, that
Yeah.
you can't do unarmed robbery here.
Yeah.
There is a balance of interests.
Yes.
And that's when we get concerned about the media.
Right.
It's not too often reported that there was a reasonable, honorable factor here and being fair to the public. But if
Right.
they're not informed that their interests may be sold out,
Jeopardized, right.
then they won't know. And they
Yeah.
will be critical without being informed.
That's true. I can understand that. Let's move on a little bit before we get too heated in this discussion.
No.
But we'll be watching to see what happens. I'm very interested, and I feel enlightened. Now, there are two pieces of legislation that are going on here in Dedham that you're working on?
Yes.
Okay.
Local pieces, so to speak, or will have a very strong local impact.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. Legislation can be so far-reaching, like the Boston Garden Bill, and also can be a forum where we address local concerns. We have reached the era of regional businesses. We have things like Home Mart that visit our communities as proposals, Costco that come, or the Home Depot, which is threatening to come into West Roxbury, which will impact Dedham greatly. And what we have are zoning, which may be commercial, that used to exist at a time before we had the ability to have these gigantic regional businesses. And so a developer may comply with the zoning laws that says, well, I'm a commercial use, it's commercially zoned, I can come in here. And there's no regard for traffic or air quality. Or you may have a situation
Yeah,
where...
but there's also a thing, now what about local jobs for local people and that kind of thing? I'm not sure what has happening with Dedham with jobs, but a lot of the times with those, that
Right.
money the Dedham residents may dump their money into that store, and all of that money may go out. Dedham may never see the money.
It's a very
so
good
in
point.
addition to dumping
It's a
a
very good
dumping
point.
ground.
But it's a very good point because these regional businesses can offer products usually for much less than the local businesses can. But the people that work for the regional businesses make much less than the local merchants earn. And the money goes back to the national headquarters, which may
Right.
be in Delaware or Atlanta. You're absolutely right. And the other problem is that the local businesses can't compete.
Right. So it potentially would close a lot of local businesses down. Now, a lot of that is going on in Boston.
That's right.
Yeah.
The other problem is that you may have a community adjacent that hosts a huge business, and it's on the border of another community. And the hosting community gets the revenue, gets some benefit from having this gigantic business in their neighborhood. The bordering community gets none of the revenue, none of the business, has no standing to come to a meeting and be heard, to say, I don't want this, or we would like a crossing guard for the school across the street for the children.
Right.
It has no legal standing to even
And
be
they may
listened to.
also have all the traffic and everything.
Exactly. And the legislation that I have filed does two things. One piece strengthens our environmental process created by the state, the MEPA process, and requires that certain people must come to the table and discuss this. It looks into traffic, that it should be a real factor in determining whether a project ought to go in.
Right.
There is right now no traffic guru. No one measures the impact in a professional, objective way. The second piece of legislation is a commission to invite the communities of Dedham and West Roxbury to have hearings, to look at the impact of regional businesses on their communities,
Right.
and establish a criteria that would allow a neighboring community to be heard. Dedham should be at the table if a Home Depot goes into West Roxbury. It
Right.
so affects the Riverdale 109 section. And they can come and be ignored right now under the law.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, a metaphor for that would be very much the way importing has affected the United States. And I don't want to go into that right now. We have. let's talk a little bit more about the environmental protection process. What is it that is being done currently, and a little bit about maybe why the Clinton administration moved the EPA. I didn't realize it wasn't a cabinet post.
Mm-hmm. And you'd like to
if you,
have at that level
yeah.
of major policy making.
So what now? What is it? You know, you said that there isn't anything at the community level or at the state level with the environmental protection. Is that a private industry?
Well, no. There is a in Massachusetts we have a Secretary of Environmental Affairs, and that's a cabinet level post. However, there is not the teeth. The strength of that office is very weak.
Why?
Example. We have this MEPA process, the environmental process for building certain things of a certain footage if they're by a state roadway. And going through that process, which one had to do for this Home Depot on the Dedham-West Roxbury line, during that entire process, the 109 Bridge Street intersection was never discussed. That is an historical bridge scheduled to be redone in 1994. That bridge is level of service F, the lowest level of service of our bridge system in the state. And deciding whether it's advisable to put in a gigantic lumberyard home improvement store a quarter of a mile down the road, it was never examined what is the impact of 10,000 cars more a day on that intersection.
Right. Right.
That intersection is already failing.
That should be observed by that has to be really thought about at the community level, because it seems like a small thing. At the community level, it's a very large thing, but at the if you're dealing with 160,000 people's problems,
right.
So then it becomes a very small thing,
right.
Or at least an obscure thing.
And it's important to Dedham. Dedham has a pay detail there every day.
Right.
It's very dangerous, and when you add at least 10,000 more cars, and you're talking about a tractor-trailer truck on a regular basis.
We're not talking about the tractor-trailer trucks, right?
On a regular basis, it's almost inconceivable that a Home Depot plan got reviewed and certified by the state environmental process, and the DPW for the Commonwealth was never at the table, and the traffic impact on the intersection was never examined.
So the recommendation then is to have a standard?
Right.
And what is
to have a punch list, to have appropriate parties with responsibility to the public be at the table.
Okay. And how are those appropriate parties going to be decided? Is that in a suggestive mode?
No, it's in the legislation. We look at the different levels of government, from local to statewide, that common sense and history have shown ought to be there. Now, you may have a party, let's say the MDC, let's say it was not on an MDC roadway, it's on a state roadway, but not MDC. They were on the punch list to come to the meeting. They would come and say, listen, this is not within my jurisdiction. It's not an MDC roadway. I have no reason to be here. Then they just sign off. They came. It was determined it's inappropriate for them to participate, and they're not at the table.
Right.
However, it will require everyone to be there, and if you have a responsibility in this project, you must attend to it.
Yeah, it's a very logical process, you know.
And very simple.
Yeah, okay, I understand that. Now let's talk a little bit more on the local level with the community selectmen meetings and the town development and responsibility through these town meetings. How is that impacting at the state level? Well,
every city and town has some kind of form of town government. And in the communities that I represent, they have select people that are elected for a period of terms. And they have certain functions and responsibility for local government. There are times when local government is impacted greatly by the state, and they will come to the state for education, for information, for assistance. And that's what I do, is periodically attend the select meetings in each of my communities. I will let them know I'm coming. It does a lot of things for me. One, I get to understand what are the problems that they have to deal with on a regular basis. And that's very important seasoning for me when I'm working on state issues. And as a practical matter, they'll know I'm coming, and they can say, listen, Senator, I need your help on these things. I have you more information on this thing. So it's communication, an awful lot of it.
Right, and even as much as impacting this kind of thing with the bridge on
yes.
that level. Okay, and what are some of the suggestions that you might have for developing the responsibility of the townspeople at the town meetings and such?
I mean, for us, the citizens?
Yeah, for the citizens communicating with the selectmen, for instance.
Well, I can't overstate how
yeah.
important it is for residents to speak up, for them to communicate their concerns, for us to realize that our government at local or state level does not work on automatic pilot. It's about us having information, making observations, making recommendations, and then pursuing them. To just put it on the table and walk away won't solve it. It just exposes it. And not to create an adversarial environment. I unveiled a problem, ha-ha. What are you going to do about it?
Right.
You know, I have a problem, how can we solve this? And make it about solving the problem and not about personal ambitions or the kinds of things that are not important and aren't going to serve the public good.
Right.
If we could require that standard of each other at any public forum, we would all be better off in a personal way, and
certainly
also
get a lot more done.
in solving our problems, and it will be much more enjoyable.
Okay, that's very helpful. Now, we're talking about rules and turf rules and that kind of thing, and egos and such. You want to talk a little bit about the difference at the federal, state, city, and town jurisdiction levels?
Sure. I see much more clearly, especially now as a state senator, that there are levels of government, that a government is complicated, and that sometimes you can't get something done just because the process is too long.
Right.
When I address a problem, I consider the water rate problem is a major one. Now, those are water bills that are created by our local communities.
Okay, now let's talk about the water rate problem. I know
Sure.
we're narrowing down on time, so we're going to have to make this as tight a package as possible. Specifically, what water rate problem? Just so that it's...
We have been ordered by the federal government to clean up Boston Harbor.
Okay.
And we've been ordered to have a second backup treatment plan. The cost is about $6 billion. We were offered the money, 90% of it, by the federal government. For 10 years, the state sat on it and never exercised that option. Now the ratepayers having to pay the cleanup of that harbor. So we have 61 communities that happen to be alive and around right now who are paying for the cleanup of a national historic landmark that's been polluted by vessels from all over the world. It's a good example of how we interface with each other.
Right.
You know,
how is it that that money gets sat on for 10 years without?
Having not been in office, I can't really tell you. We got warned. I've read the warnings. I've gone over the history of this. I can't find, it's not defendable.
There's miscommunications at the various levels of jurisdiction and such. Okay, enough to say that. Okay, so what's happening at now?
Well,
the consequences is?
It's starting to approach about $100 a month for the average sized family on a combined water and sewer bill. And that's a serious injustice and also an economic problem because people, that's not money they're using now to go to the theater, to buy a new dryer, to get their car tuned up.
To buy groceries.
To buy groceries.
Let's just talk
just
basics.
to survive.
Right.
It was such high unemployment, and more high in our area of the country than the rest of the nation. Very serious problem, and it's an injustice. So what are we doing? We're working. I'm getting more and more calls from people in our senatorial district. I'm working with the people in the town level. I'm working very closely with our congressperson, Joe Moakley, and we're developing a grassroots campaign with the federal level of government that can recommend more federal funding to be sent back here to this region to provide some relief to the ratepayers.
Okay, that's excellent. Now, what is the community responsibility around this water bill? What can we, as communities?
It's very important that you write letters and make phone calls. And
now,
that
the
you
letters
be
and
persistent.
phone calls actually get read and heard. This is the...
Yes. You know, see, that's why I get so troubled by the misrepresentation in the media. When one legislator gets a call from 8 or 9 people on the same subject matter, that has an impact.
Okay.
It makes a difference.
Okay, okay. Now, is there anything else that you would like to cover that we haven't covered? I just want to make sure that we've got as much as we can in the nutshell here for the...
Well, I think it's important that we carry on,
And,
that we have confidence in our system, that we have confidence in ourselves to address our problems.
okay, All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the time that you've taken here, and especially now that I more clearly understand the vast number of things that you have to look at with 160,000 people tugging at you. And if all of us wrote letters in to Senator Marion Walsh about the water bill, then I imagine, and other problems that we're having with the building and such, then I imagine that we'd have a much easier community to work with. You've been watching Beacon. You've been watching On Beacon Hill. I'm Paula Robinson, and I'm Jard at the end of the day. Thank you very much for watching. We look forward to seeing you next show.